The whole world, and certainly the legal world, seems to be in complete chaos at the moment, with the media misleading you, like blatantly misleading you. I'll tell you about that in a minute. There's a massive fallout with Z Youssef of Reform. He's stepped down. There's a massive fallout between Trump and Elon Musk. I'll tell you about that in a minute. And the justice system, in terms of the punishments that are handed out, are just grotesquely unacceptable. And more about those in the second half of the video. So please do subscribe for this brutally honest approach to the law as it applies in current events and generally. And I'll be very grateful for you to subscribe. And also a huge thank you to all of you, the thousands of you that have subscribed to my new Off the Record channel, talking about politics and my unedited raw views over on that channel. I can't believe the overwhelming response to that video and that channel. So thank you so much for subscribing. I'll link it below. I'm very keen to share my candid thoughts with you. So thank you very much for jumping over there to subscribe. So let's go to this first article here from The Guardian, and we'll see what's wrong with this. On the face of it, you may not think there's anything wrong with this, but there's a very important distinction I'll come back to in a moment. They quote Aqua Reindorf of King's Counsel. I think they should have included the postnominals out of a sign of respect, but they didn't. They say that she said that the law never permitted self-ID, but trans campaigners have called the remarks profoundly unhelpful. Now, the headline reads that the EHRC commissioner, which is obviously Aqua Reindorf here, calls for trans people to accept perceived reduced rights. Now, that in itself, I think, is misleading, because she did not call for them, so far as I understand it, to accept perceived reduced rights. That's not exactly what she said. I'll come back to that in just a moment. She has addressed this. I'll come back to that in a moment. But the bigger problem with this is that that's not the original headline. That was only changed out of pressure from being pointed out that this was in fact incorrect. The original headline was even worse. You go to the Wayback Machine, archive.org. Please do go and support them, chip in. They are doing a fundraiser. If you like to be able to look back on websites, do go and pop them £1 or £2 and help them keep going. Not sponsored, obviously. The original headline, which only a few hours earlier, was EHRC Commissioner calls for trans people to accept reduced rights. That is a fundamentally different statement and fundamentally incorrect, as was pointed out by Aqua Reindorf of King's Counsel herself, who is the EHRC commissioner. She says, I expect the misleading headline and the first paragraph of the article, which reflected what was said in the headline, to be urgently corrected. Trans people's rights haven't been reduced, and I didn't say at any time that they had. She said, I said that trans people have been lied to about what their rights are. And then goes on to say a little bit later that the first paragraph had been slightly altered, but the headline remains defamatory, and then eventually they changed the headline. Now, I think The Guardian is on the hook for this one, because I did quote this, and I said that it was a staggering misrepresentation from a news outlet where the Supreme Court, in its judgment, which I'll show to you in a moment, well, I've screenshotted it here anyway, but it's this judgment here, but I've put the screenshots in there, expressly confirmed that the substance of that headline was a false representation. For example, paragraphs 248 and 264 of this judgment, which prevents precisely this from being said. The Supreme Court, in its wisdom, knew that some people would get the wrong end of the stick on this and misreport it. And here we are, because this is one of such paragraph of that judgment. Paragraph 248, the Supreme Court sought necessary to put it in its own little subheading here and said why this interpretation would not be disadvantageous to or remove protection from trans people with or without a GRC. They say, finally, we've concluded that a biological sex interpretation would not have the effect of disadvantaging or removing important protection under the Equality Act 2010 from trans people, whether with or without a GRC. Our reasons for this conclusion follow. We consider protection from both direct and indirect discrimination and harassment and equal pay. And in essence, it goes on to say they are still protected, because if an employer were to say, you identify as trans, or you have a GRC, or whichever, and discriminate against them for it, that would still be unlawful discrimination on the grounds of gender reassignment and self-identity. Not that they are a woman under the Equality Act, because the Supreme Court was very clear in making that distinction. But the Supreme Court thought necessary to actually specify what it meant throughout this judgment. And at paragraph 264, they say again, reading the bit in pink first, this conclusion does not remove or diminish the important protections available under the Equality Act for trans people with a GRC, as we've explained. To the contrary, this potentially vulnerable group remains protected in the ways we've described. So the Supreme Court must have known that this was going to happen, must have known that headlines were going to report on it, must have known that they would misinterpret it, misrepresent it, and indeed here we have it. In my view, in my personal opinion, based on all the reasons that I've given you, you understand, this is my personal opinion that the Guardian here has misrepresented what was said by the HRC Commissioner, what was said in the judgment, and what this actually means. This original headline, once again, do go and read it, form all your own views. It's still available on archive.org. It will be there now forever, hopefully, if they continue. It says here that she called for trans people to accept reduced rights, which is not what she said. And also, even now that they've squeezed in the word perceived, it's still not what she said, but it has gone some way to correcting the misrepresentation. And so now, just before I come on to some other topics that are grotesquely unacceptable in terms of punishments rendered and things going on in the world, I feel that it's the right time to talk to you about the media, about stories, about the way these things are covered, and about how they can mislead you. Here's a snippet I recorded earlier, which I think you'll find very interesting. Now, I've shared with you different news stories just recently that are covered very differently depending on the political leanings of the news outlet reporting the story. Whether they lean left or lean right, you might get a very different picture if you just read the headlines and the above the fold bit from these news organizations. And so in this video, I thought I'd share with you one such example, and that is about the release of Tommy Robinson having purged his contempt. You'll remember I covered in great detail where the court effectively said, if you remove the video and take steps to remove it elsewhere and take steps to comply with the injunction of the court not to repeat the defamatory allegations, you can purge your contempt and reduce your sentence. This is one such story reporting on that. And for that, I use Ground News, which is a partner to my channel. And here's why I use it, because whether you've got a left or right leaning outlet will to some degree influence how you think about it. Ground News, when you look at an article like this one on Tommy Robinson, first of all, it will give you the distribution, left or right, on who is covering the story, and some of them only covered by the left or the right, more about that in a minute. But it also gives you a bias comparison, so you can see at a glance how they are being covered and what the differences are between the left and the right. And I chuckle because sometimes it is so different that you can only but find it mildly amusing when they are so different. Let's take a look at this. So, left-leaning coverage of the story of Tommy Robinson being released early. So the description here, which is generated by Ground's AI feature, analysing the headlines and giving you a comparison, says, left-leaning coverage frames Tommy Robinson predominantly as a far-right anti-Islam agitator whose false allegations and contempt of court showcase an absence of remorse, emphasising the legal and ideological consequences of his actions with emotionally charged terms like far-right and so on. In contrast, the right pivots towards portraying him as a defender against injustice, using emphatic language such as freed, and his sentence has been slashed, highlighting his early release and downplaying the ideological labels. And then we can look at some of the headlines themselves, and you can see the difference here. Just going with the top one here. Tommy Robinson, figure of British far-right, released earlier than expected. The next one, despite lack of remorse, British white-ring extremists can look forward to freedom again. And so you get a bit of a flavour, even before reading the articles, of what those outlets say. Then comparing it with the right-leaning outlets and some of those headlines, they do say anti-Islam activist Tommy Robinson to be released, but it's a lot more neutral in tone, you'll notice, and emphasises what he stood against, such as anti-grooming activist Tommy Robinson set for early release. And another one from The Sun, Tommy Robinson is to be freed from jail after sentence for contempt slashed. So you can see quite clearly the right-leaning outlets are more neutral in tone or in favour of Tommy Robinson and what he stands against, whereas the left-leaning are obviously more emphatic on him being far-right, an extremist, and lacking remorse. But if you want to know how accurate the news stories are that you're reading, Ground News also has a factuality score over on the right-hand side here. So it assures you that 80% of these sources score highly on their factuality scale. But it also gives you a breakdown as to ownership if that's something of interest to you. For example, 38% of these outlets are owned by wealthy private owners. Bet you didn't know that. But also, some stories are just not covered by the left or the right, and that's why Ground News has a blind spot feature, which will show you examples where 0 sources reporting the story lean right, or 0 sources reporting the story lean left, so you can make sure that you get an accurate picture. And of course, as they are a partner to my channel, if you want to use Ground News, I get a great discount, which is 40% off using the link ground.news/BBB. It's on screen and you've got the QR code you can scan with your phone. It's in the description below. 40% is a fantastic discount for unlimited access to the world's news so that you can get a better idea of whether you are being swayed and manipulated one way or the other by the left or the right. And hopefully you'll get the full picture. So thank you to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Okay, with all that in mind, let's get back to the stories, back to the news stories, and we'll show you some things that might make you feel a little bit disenfranchised with the way that things are running in this country at the moment. Let's take, first of all, a look at this overarching story with thousands of criminal cases collapsing due to missing or lost police evidence. We go through all the trouble of prosecuting people for heinous and horrendous crimes, only for the police to lose evidence or not obtain it in the first place. Bearing in mind, these cost thousands, countless thousands of hours. I mean, if anyone were to instruct a lawyer to even take a look at a case and provide an advice, you're already up at £2,000 or £3,000 just for one lawyer to take one look at one case and provide a provisional advice. You're already looking at thousands of pounds. Why? Because it takes hours to read into a case. You can't just look at one piece of paper and get an idea and say, well, this is what I think, because there might be another piece of paper that contradicts it. And there's thousands of pieces of paper. You've got to look through the whole thing. And that is why these costs are often so horrendous. So bearing in mind the thousands and thousands of pounds that these cases collapse, sometimes and very often, in fact, during the trial, even they're partway through a jury trial, which has taken years to get to that point, thousands of these cases, many of the most serious and violent and sexual offences are collapsing every year because of loss, damage, missing or otherwise inadequate evidence. The BBC said that more than 30,000 prosecutions in England and Wales collapsed just in this period alone, October 2020 to September 2024, including 70 homicides and 550 sexual offences. But let's take a look at when they do come to court, what we actually dish out as these punishments here. So bearing in mind how these stories are presented to you, how they might be misleading, how they might lead you to think one thing or another, let's take a look at how this story is presented here. Now, I'm not for a minute saying that the BBC is misleading, but let's take a look. It says, driver detained for police pile-up on first date. And it says here that this guy was a personal trainer who caused a pile-up of police cars after fleeing from them whilst driving home from a first date. He's been sentenced to 14 months in a young offenders institution. Now, that can be anyone up to 21 years old. So he's just shy of that. Bearing in mind, again, Lucy Connolly is in prison for 31 months, so some 2.5 years, much more than this guy, having caused, it just says here, 7 officers were injured and 5 police cars damaged in the crash. He was doing 120 miles an hour down this road, fleeing from the police. And apparently the woman who he was on a date with in his car pleaded with him to stop, fearing that he would kill somebody. Now let's take a look at the actual remarks here and the string of offences. So you can see here on the 9th of April, the 11th of April, the 12th of April, the 13th, the 15th and the 16th of April. There are offences here of dangerous driving, failing to stop twice. DOTIL is essentially driving offences, traffic infringements and no insurance. And again, the same with no insurance, the same no insurance, the same no insurance, etc. Court history. He appeared before magistrates on the 19th of April, pleaded guilty to all matters at the first available opportunity, committed for sentence on bail. Listed for sentence at the Crown Court. It was adjourned for inquiries, etc. He's 20 years old, and the judge then will come back to his background later on. Summary of events, just after 1:50 in the morning on the 9th of April, he was driving a BMW X5 he'd purchased on finance some time earlier, despite only having a provisional license, despite having no insurance, despite admitting that he'd only paid for 3 driving lessons, that he should have been nowhere near the driving seat of any vehicle, let alone such a large, powerful SUV in such circumstances. Bearing in mind he was doing 120 miles an hour at one stage. Judge says, I do not accept that you did not fully understand the position and the legal requirements as opposed to those in Iran. He said you were 14 when you left that country and you've been in this country for 6 years. Whether resident or visiting, it's incumbent on anyone to know and abide by the law. In addition, I've just indicated your previous stop in 2023 means you were well aware of your failure to keep to the rules. As you can see above, this case was adjourned because they wanted to make inquiries about other driving convictions from March 24 and in respect of September 2023. So he was full aware that what he was doing was wrong. You can find this online. It's public justice. You can find it all. And ultimately, you can read through exactly what happened here. And he ended up with 14 months in a young offenders institution, less 22 days. But as you can see, if you compare this with other social media offences, inciting violence in the case of Lucy Connolly, and I'm not singling that, that's just one that is in the media a lot that people can compare this with. I don't think the general public will see this as a proper proportionate sentence for a guy who has 3 driving lessons, driving a BMW X5 120 miles an hour, putting everybody's lives at risk, including the girl that was in the car with him, all the police officers that were chasing him, smashing up all the cars, causing millions of pounds worth of damage, and he gets much, much less than Lucy Connolly for a single tweet, albeit we all accept that it was a reprehensible tweet that she shouldn't have said. Nonetheless, I think a lot of people just don't accept that as being proportionate. There was another story that I was going to tell you about where, let's just say, an evil mum who had treated her son so badly that he had life-changing injuries. That's probably all I can really say without this video getting limited, because YouTube is a family-friendly platform. But nonetheless, she has now sparked anger because they are releasing her from jail early, despite the horrendous life-changing injuries to her son. I'll leave you to go and read about that story yourself because I can't really go into detail on this channel. It was that bad. And the final story that I'll talk to you about is on the lines of things that feel unjust. This actually resulted in a positive story to end this video with. With the help of Free Speech Union, which I am a gold member. I encourage you to be a member. They've not asked me to do that. It's not sponsored by them in a way whatsoever. They say a publisher who claimed that she was hounded out of her job for holding gender-critical beliefs has now reached a legal settlement with Hatchet UK. You can go and read about this on the Free Speech Union website. But in short, Ursula worked for this company for over a decade and felt that she had to bring a claim for belief-based and sex discrimination after backlash for publishing the book Material Girls in 2021 by Kathleen Stock, questioning the idea that gender identity should override biological sex in law and policy. Now, given the fact that we've now had this For Women Scotland case in the Supreme Court that confirms that woman in the Equality Act does mean biological woman, and therefore that is how the Equality Act works. And after the Maya Forstater case, this is a protected philosophical belief to hold such beliefs. She's had to bring this claim, but now we understand from Free Speech Union has reached a legal settlement. So you can go and read that as well. If I forget to link it, you can find it online. It's on their website. I urge you, if you value your free speech, go and join Free Speech Union. It is absolutely worth it to know that they will stand by you, stand by free speech, and help you should the time come. And finally, as I almost forgot to come to this, why is Elon Musk and Donald Trump falling out? I'll try to do this as concisely as possible. I think there's a lot of people in the United States who will be very interested in this as well, because Elon Musk was in my view, very instrumental in Donald Trump being elected as president once again. So what's happened here is a major fallout with Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Now, from what I can see, Elon Musk is unhappy with Donald Trump's tax and spending bill, who's called this the Big Beautiful Bill Act. Now, it appears that Elon Musk is unhappy with this because it seems that it might significantly increase the US federal deficit and undermine all of the work that he's been doing to try to reduce government spending in his DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. And as the head of DOGE, he'd worked out to cut federal expenditure, aiming to save trillions of dollars, eliminating wasteful programs on government spending and government workforce, etc. Elon Musk has essentially said that this bill, which includes a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut regime, has increased defense spending, raised the debt ceiling by $4 trillion, and contradicted all of the goals that he's been working towards in DOGE, which could add something in the region of $2 to $5 trillion to the national debt over a decade, according to Congressional Budget Office and other analysts. Now, Elon Musk has obviously expressed his concern about this bill, that it's going to burden Americans with, as he put it, crushingly unsustainable debt, describing it as a disgusting abomination. He suggests that it's legislation that favors lawmakers' constituencies over fiscal responsibilities. And on the other hand, some people might say that Elon Musk is criticizing it because this bill eliminates $7,500 of electric vehicle tax that has benefited Tesla customers and imposed a $250 annual registration fee for EV owners, which obviously we see happening in the UK here as well. And so because he's being so vocal about it, saying that they should kill the bill, and he appears to be supporting campaigns that are against politicians who've backed the bill, this essentially now looks like this big fallout between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. So if you followed that at all, that is a very brief overview. I'll probably read into it in a bit more detail and see how it develops. So as always, I urge you to read very carefully what you read in headlines, because if you only saw the first headline before it's amended, or they don't amend it, or the headline remains misleading in any way, you would need to get a full picture to really base your views on those. So I urge you to do that. Check out Ground News. It's genuinely fantastic. I use Ground News to look at both sides of the coin. And as I mentioned, thank you so much to the thousands of you that have subscribed on my new channel. I'm quite overwhelmed. I didn't expect it to get that much response so quickly. I will link it below. Black Belt Barrister, off the record, and you will get my sort of unfiltered views on there, insofar as I can still say as a barrister. There are still some limits, and I'm obviously not going to be discriminatory and hateful and that sort of thing. That's not what it's for, but it is there for my genuine views. So I hope you'll join me on there. Thank you to those that have so far. Thank you for watching this video. I enjoy sharing my law insights with you here, and indeed my personal views over there. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.